Hello and welcome everyone once again to another episode of Present Potential. I'm your host Hassan and I'm so grateful for everyone who has engaged, who has listened, who has reached out, messaged, or anything within the past few weeks based on the conversations we've had with amazing guests. Also, talking about empathy, about LinkedIn, about how connections are so important, and also changing our lives and adapting to the situations based on our environment. I'm so grateful for all of that. And before we get into the conversation today with a specialist in communication, which I'm very excited to get into the discussion with, I wanted to share very quickly that I'll be hosting a masterclass on the 30th of October. It's going to be about communication, funny enough, which is the theme that we're going to be discussing today. The title is The Art of Communication. The art in communicating with confidence, and that's going to be on the 30th of October at 2 p.m. GMT. So mark your calendars, and if you have time, I'd love for you to join. And without further ado, I'm so pleased and honored to welcome our guest today. Um, I'll do a very quick introduction, but because I probably am not the best in introductions, I'll pass it to the guest. So I'd like to welcome Mara Carpencu to the episode. Mara is a specialist in communication. She spent around 15 years or more leading PR and marketing campaigns for global brands that we know of, such as DHL, KPMG, and ENOC. She's also an advocate and a believer in sustainability. And I've connected with Mara over LinkedIn and we've had interesting conversations. But in my old fashion, in terms of how I introduce people, I'm going to stop here and pass it on to Mara. Mara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Hassan. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk to you. And it was a great introduction, really. I don't have much to add to that. You nailed it. So I've been in communications and marketing for over 17 years, out of which 15 of those have been in Dubai across different fields, from PR to marketing, events. Before that, in a previous life, as I'd like to say, before coming to Dubai, I was actually a journalist. So I've sort of had the 360 experience of communications from pretty much all of the possible angles and roles you can think of. So I'm excited to talk to you today about communicating.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing. And it sounds like there's a lot to discuss. And maybe in our usual fashion on this podcast, maybe we could start from the beginning. Did you always want to go into communication? Was that something that you were aspiring to do when you were in school, or did something change where you thought, I want to learn more about whether it's journalism or media or broadcasting? When did it all begin?
Well, I think it all began when I started talking. When I was maybe, 1 or 2 years old. I remember my mom keeps telling me that I used to talk incessantly, and to the point where she would beg me to shut up just so she could have some quiet moments. But that's probably not where my aspirations to become a communicator started. I actually wanted to be a vet when I was a kid because I loved animals, and I thought, what better career than spend the whole day around animals. But then I discovered there's also some downsides to that profession, so it put my mind off it for a while. But to be frank, it wasn't until probably my last year of high school when I actually locked in and decided that I wanted to study journalism. I looked at a few career options. I even contemplated at some point becoming a judge. But to really understand what I wanted to do and what I would have liked to do as a career, I actually looked at what are these professions, or what is involved. So for instance, I went into a courtroom to understand, what does a judge do, what does a lawyer do, and I think when I actually realized that I'd like to try journalism was when I was a teenager, and my dad was driving off from work, and on the side of the street, it was raining. He saw an old woman who had stopped, and he was putting up a tent just outside the city. And he was with a bike, and it was pouring rain. So my dad stopped, and he, asked the man if he needs some help. And he actually turned out to be a sort of globetrotter. He was from Germany, and he was doing this trip with just on his bicycle to spread awareness about a charity foundation that he was supporting. So my dad brought him in, and we thought, wow, that's such an interesting story, and it's such a good cause as well to talk about. So we actually took him to a couple of the newspapers in our town, and I went and I spoke to the journalist, and I told him, look, we just met this guy. I think you really have to listen to his story because it's so inspiring. It's so interesting. The guy has done, I don't know how many, 10,000 kilometers on his bike to spread awareness about this cause. And I think that was the first time that I went into a newspaper room, and I looked around, and I realized the power that journalists have to tell stories and to share and to communicate. And that's, I think, the first time when it actually clicked, and I realized this is actually something that I'd love to try. So yeah, I went to study journalism, but at the same time, because I wanted to explore all the facets of communication, in parallel, I studied marketing as well. And I got really interested about how brands tell their stories, because usually journalists, they tell the people's stories, but then marketeers tell brand stories. And I found some of those to be really inspiring and fascinating. And I thought, okay, well, I've studied journalism, I've studied marketing. What can I do? And I realized, well, actually, there's PR that combines these two. So after dabbling a bit in journalism and in marketing, I then did a master in mass media and public relations. And I realized this is the career that I want to pursue. So here I am today doing what I've studied and what I've loved doing over the past 17 years.
Oh wow, that's such an inspiring story. Like from going to wanting to be a vet at some point and then experiencing different professions by visiting their workplaces or their environment. So even going to a courtroom and contemplating whether that's something that you wanted to do. And then that story with your father as well, like going and finding someone and helping him spread his story and develop the awareness that you helped him to share. And I'm wondering, like, once you went into that environment with journalists and saw how stories can be transformative for people listening, what were you feeling? What were some of those emotions that you might have experienced, if you could remember even?
Well, I remember when I actually wrote my own first article for a newspaper, and I had just finished my first year of journalism studies, and I went to a local newspaper, and I said, I want to be an intern for the summer. I'd like to work for you. I want to have that experience. And I think that's very important, especially when you're looking at career options. And that's why I mentioned to you that I tried different things, because it's very important for you to get a feel of what that actually implies before you commit to something. So I went into this newspaper, and I told them that I'd love to intern for them over the summer, and they sent me off to do some legwork in the city. I don't remember exactly what it was about. It was something around the start of the school year. And what are the prices of, school books and things like that. It was a very, very easy lifestyle type of story. But I loved that process of going and researching and talking to people and putting together all of that information into something that people might find useful. And then when I first saw my article in print, it was a very proud moment. I mean, I was just, I think, 19 at that time. So I was really excited to have my name published in a newspaper. but then I think, as I then later on went into TV. So I had a TV show where I was actually interviewing people similar to what you're doing now, but I was on the other on the other end. And I got to meet so many amazing people. It was a show called Portrait. So it was about the lives of these successful people. From my home country, and I got to listen to their stories and ask them about what led them to where they are today, and similar to what you're doing in your podcast, which is why I loved the idea and I agreed to do this. But I think it's just that that excitement of finding out something new, something different, something inspirational from people that have achieved success, or they have so much to say, and maybe they don't always have a voice, or they're not given a platform or an opportunity to tell their stories. And I think that's the thing that I loved most about journalism. I then turned to the page and decided to focus on PR and communications, and go into more of that brand storytelling that I was mentioning before. But I think there's something special about having that ability to tell people's stories. And obviously there's many facets of journalism, and some of them are not praised, and there's different types of journalism that people might not even agree with. But I think the essence is there, telling stories, telling the truth. There's something that we learn. One of the first things you learn in journalism is always make sure that you have multiple sources of information, that you are objective, and that you're telling the truth, the complete truth. And I think that's one of the powers of journalism. And if done right, that's what it should instill.
Yeah. Oh, a couple of things that really stand out for me. Well, firstly, it's that first lesson that you get in journalism of how it's so important and powerful that you must have different sources that verify the same information, because there's people who are listening and might take your words for what they are. So just being entrusted to deliver the message as truthfully as possible is something so powerful as well. And I love the fact that you shared about how you went to ask for an internship or something that you could do to be part of this industry. I'm wondering, even before going into media and then PR and working for the brands that you've mentioned, where did you get that? I would say maybe the confidence or the desire or the drive to say I want to try this. Let me see if this is something that I want to do. Was there someone that supported the way that you thought about it or influenced you to be able to ask for things, to try them out? Where did that, I would say, courage and confidence come from?
I think it's obviously a question of upbringing, and I've been fortunate to have parents that have always been very supportive of my choices and my desires to explore and to try different things. And I was pretty outspoken even as a child. I remember, some teachers were telling me off because I was being, cheeky, and I always had this sort of sense of justice and righteousness, and I sometimes couldn't mince my words, so I was a bit too blunt. I don't think it's necessarily a question of courage to go and knock at doors. It wasn't really that let's say drastic or dramatic, but it does take I guess that willingness to try new things, to expose yourself to rejection as well, to be able to say that you've tried something, and even if it fails, at least you gave it a shot. And like I said, I think it's very important to get this very diverse experience in whatever you're trying to achieve, and to look at it from all possible angles. And at the end of the day, if you don't try, you'll never know. So I've always wanted to do things and to be, let's say, as active and as prepared as possible. So that's why I even started, while I was studying in parallel to degrees, I was also working because I wanted to have that experience and to also help me understand if it's something that I want to do, if it's a long-term sort of career that I want to pursue. So yeah, I think it's important for people to just take the chance, even if they think that they're not ready, or sometimes people fear rejection, or they fear the unknown. But you just have to trust yourself and trust your abilities and take the leap.
That's so powerful. And coming from the upbringing space where you said you've always been supported in um, communicating and following the things that you wanted as well, and just trying and failing as well. There's, I feel, some negative connotation to failure that's in order for someone to really be a specialist or a success in their field, they go through no failure. But I don't know. I feel like people don't talk enough about those moments where there's a challenge and things don't go your way, but there's so much learning that can come from that. And I'm wondering if there's a moment where you realize that, okay, I wanted to go into media, or I saw something that was really inspired, that the challenge was more than what you could have done, or maybe you did overcome it. What's experience or situation have you seen throughout your career that maybe was too challenging and then you managed to overcome it or gain some learning from that experience?
Well, I think, we face challenges every day, big or small. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're going through them until we've passed them, because we're so, set in our ways, and sometimes we're on autopilot. Probably the biggest challenge was moving to Dubai and starting over from scratch and having a complete shift in career, because I left my journalism career and I came to Dubai and I worked in retail, for instance. So that was quite a challenge for me at the time, because I was young. I was, for the first, not the first time, because I'd studied also in Brussels, so I had lived abroad before, but it was the first time for me in the Middle East, and I think probably the first evening that I was by myself, and I realized what I had left behind, because I completely, I'd left my entire life behind, and but I wanted to take this chance to try something out, to experience this sort of international dynamic environment that Dubai offered, and I, as hard as it was at the time, I knew I had to power through and to just do my best to make sure that I take advantage of this opportunity that I'm given. You can always go back. You can always go back to your old life, let's say. But I gave myself a time frame, and I told myself I'll try it out for 6 months or 1 year at most. If I don't like it, I can always go back. And lo and behold, 15 years later, I'm still here. But I think that's one of those classic Dubai stories where people come here for 1 year or 2, and then they realize it's actually not a bad place. Stay here for longer. So it's obviously, as in, I think in any situation where you are having to start fresh or you're moving to a new country, it's always challenging. It's always challenging when you're changing careers or jobs. But you just have to remember your goal. Why are you doing this? You have to have an intrinsic motivation for yourself. And it could be for various reasons, right? For me, it was the fact that I wanted that international experience and the international exposure, and I wanted to try, the marketing field as well. So for me, I had clear goals, which helped to overcome the challenges that I was facing at the time, because it was there was a goal, let's say, or like a light at the end of the tunnel that I knew I was going to see.
That's amazing. And the great thing about these live broadcasts and shows and episodes is that we get engagement from people. So we have a couple of comments, and I'll just share them because they touch in with what you've shared already. So the first one is from Sameh, and I think he was referring to the story where you were in the car with your father, and he said, "My dad used to say the same thing to me: turn off the radio in your stomach." And I can only imagine like that has to do with some sort of emotions that you'd be able to overcome it. But how does that tie in with the story that you shared, Mara?
I think it's you're always going to have, um, let's say, nervousness or maybe
Mm,
fear. We were talking about the fear of the unknown or the fear of rejection before, right? And it's important to look at them sometimes from an outsider perspective, right?
yeah,
And not to let yourself be overcome by these emotions. Try to isolate them. You there's also a reframing. You're a coach, right? So I'm sure you know this better than I do, but it's how you're framing those emotions, right? It's not I'm afraid, it's I am feeling
absolutely.
fear, or I'm feeling in a certain way. I'm not sure if that's what the comment was referring to. Maybe it was referring to the fact that my mom was telling me to shut up when I was chatty. That might be the case. But I think if we're addressing, let's say, those kind of emotions, it's important to also understand that nothing lasts forever. Everything is transient, right? So even
Mm,
what we're feeling at a certain point in time, in 5 minutes, we'll probably feel something else. And we just need to go through those emotions to, again, learn from them and come out at the other end stronger.
yeah, it's so true what you said as well in terms of how we phrase some emotions or the framing actually. So instead of saying I am afraid, which kind of indicates that we take some sort of identity of fear,
Mhm.
but saying rather, I feel afraid because it's just an emotion that is temporary and it will pass. And I'm not sure what Sama was referring to, but there's two parts to that story that Mara covered. And we have another message from Saeed, which ties into almost exactly what you were sharing in terms of the willingness. So Saeed says, appreciate the emphasis on willingness. This aligns with how motivation is intrinsic, and although externally influenced too, willingness and intent internally is a massive supercharger of efforts. It's exactly almost word for word of what you were sharing before.
Yes, it's very important for us to be willing to take those risks and to take chances and to go and knock on doors that might be closed for us. And I think a lot of people, we tend to get into this comfort zone,
Mm,
and we sometimes expect things to fall on our laps, or we just accept the status quo. And in a lot of cases, if we take a little action, we can change things. We can, you know, achieve our goals, and we can, move forward. But you have to be willing to give that a shot. And I
yeah.
think that's why it has to come from within you. I mean, of course, if you have a coach or a therapist that can help you through some of these challenging times, to give you a bit of a push. But at the end of the day, nobody's going to do the work for you.
Mm.
Everything has to come from you, and you have to be willing to put yourself out there.
That's so true. And on that as well, because I'm also really curious to hear what keeps you motivated. What are your drivers that really propel you to continue towards that goal or the goals that you have aligned for yourself? What's something that you keep reminding yourself or saying in terms of communication that is your driver?
Hmm. Well, I actually have this quote as a reminder on my phone as a screensaver. It's a quote from Jane Goodall, the primate conservationist, and it goes something like this. I'll paraphrase it, but basically it says that everything you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. So I found that quote very powerful, because if you think about it, everything we do from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed throughout our lives makes an impact, whether it's on our lives, our future selves, on the people around us, on maybe our clients, our colleagues, our friends, the circumstances around us. So you have to be very mindful and very intentional with where you put your efforts, going back to the willingness part. And I think for me personally, it's about doing good in the world and doing good to the people around me. You mentioned in the beginning that I'm a sustainability advocate, so I try to do the best I can to be a good planet citizen, but also, a good friend, a good colleague, and to leave a positive impact around me. And I think if I manage to leave something a bit better than how I found it, whether it's a situation or a place or a person, then I think that's really where I find I'm achieving my goals and my purpose.
Such a powerful quote. I mean, everything that we do does make a difference, and it depends on the difference that we want to make. And it's reminding me as well of what you mentioned earlier, that taking action is, if not the most important part, but also a big driver for what we feel, or stepping out of that comfort zone, or taking some sort of different route to be able to identify ourselves with anything that we want to do. And we touched on sustainability, and there's a lot that we could cover as well there. But tying it with communication as well, what are ways that you use communication to help with, like, building awareness, or helping with sustainability, and making the world a better place?
That's a very important question. And I think sustainability nowadays is being thrown around a bit like, one of these buzzwords, not just by companies, but also by, people who are trying to understand a bit more about the situation. And there's a lot to be said about this. I don't know how much time we have to cover everything, but just to give you maybe a quick response on this, I think, and again, tying it back to your, the topic of our discussion, which is communicating with purpose. At the end of the day, we're all linked, on this planet, and yes, organizations have financial purpose, and everything is, let's say, revenue driven. But at the end of the day, if we don't have a healthy environment to live in, if we don't have equality, if we don't have justice and education and sustainability, you have to remember, is not just about the environment. And I think that's where people kind of it's kind of misunderstood, but sustainability is everything that drives the well-being of people and planet. So it's not just the environment, but it's also, if you look at the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there's about 17 of them, and they cover everything from environment to accessible education and gender equality and infrastructure and livable cities. So there's a lot of things that sustainability encompasses. And when we're communicating about sustainability, it's very important, again, to go back to what is it that the purpose of that organization is related to sustainability. And for us as individuals as well, when we're looking at our own impact on let's say, the environment or the people around us, how can we live in a more sustainable way? there's a lot of miscommunication, and there's so many different reports and data out there that it's very difficult for people to understand what's really important. And that's why communication is crucial, to make sure that people understand what is the, let's say, the urgency of climate change, for instance, and why it's important for us to hit the 1.5 degree warming threshold. And unfortunately, a lot of companies or NGOs that are trying to make a difference, they don't really use the right language to appeal to the masses or to people. It's there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of scientific terms. So that's why it's important to communicate in such a way that the current challenges of the planet are understood or are easily digested by you and me and everyone around us who's not a scientist or is not really involved in what's happening in the world. So communication is very important, whether you're, let's say, a company that stands for a cause, or whether you're an individual who wants to make a difference, or an NGO who's trying to actually make a positive impact on the world.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. That's such a, I would say, concise and effective message in the way that you've delivered it, with the right words and intention to spread more awareness about sustainability, the different aspects that goes into play, and how we can lead with purpose as individuals and as well in companies, and being very mindful of how we use those words to be as clear as possible as well. Thank you for that.
Well, I mean, that's a whole separate discussion. We can have, a different podcast just on that. But yeah, in a few minutes, in a nutshell, in a few minutes.
We could definitely do that. And usually at the end of each of our episodes, we have a tradition where we ask the guests to share a quote or a mantra or a piece of wisdom that you live by, and how this has influenced your life.
Well, I've already mentioned to you one of the quotes that I kind of live by, and I am reminded of every time I phone. But another, let's say, mantra or piece of wisdom that I've also lived by, and it's something that our CEO also likes to remind us of, is the fact that change is the only constant in life. And I've sort of taken that quite literally throughout my life, and I've embraced change, and I've not been afraid of changing countries and careers and paths, because at the end of the day, if we want to grow and if we want to have different experiences, we have to embrace change. It's inevitable, whether we like it or not. So we might as well lean into it and welcome change, and make the most of it.
Thank you so much, Mara. There's so much there that we could reflect on and learn as well, and in terms of change, of how it's always going to be constant, and adapting to it and leaning to it and not feeling that fear. And it connects with everything that you've mentioned as well. And I'm so grateful for you taking the time to share with us, and to also help us to understand how effective communication can be in terms of spreading messages and connecting with people. um, Thank you to everyone who joined in as well. So as always in our podcast, we end with a phrase which I believe is something that I like to live by, which is, today is the most important day of your life. And I'd pass it back to Mara if she has anything else that she'd like to share before we wrap up for today.
Well, thank you, Hassan, for the opportunity to speak with you today. And it's been a pleasure. And I hope that your audience found something useful from our conversation. I look forward to speaking with you again.
I'm sure they have. Thank you so much, Mara. And thank you, everyone, for